My mom said everyone gets something small. My son got socks. My sister's kids got phones. Did I do something wrong, Mom? He asked. I hugged him. That night, I cut them from my health insurance. The cake turned out to be crooked. I noticed it at 5 in the morning when I took it out of the oven, but there was no time to redo it. My shift started at 9, and I had to be at my mom's by 3. The chocolate icing had slid to one side, as if the cake was trying to escape its own birthday. Volin was sleeping on my bed with his arms spread out, and I thought, he won't care that the cake is crooked. It's just important to him that I baked it. Clarissa will definitely bring something perfect from that bakery on Chestnut Street, where one cupcake costs as much as my daily salary. But it was my son's birthday, and I wanted to do at least something myself. We arrived at exactly 3 o'clock. Mom opened the door with a broad smile that somehow didn't reach her eyes. Volin immediately handed her a drawing, a dinosaur wearing a party hat. Marjorie looked, nodded, and said, "Very nice, dear," and then turned to me. "Clarissa is already here. You're a little late." The clock on the wall showed 3 o'clock. We weren't late. In the living room, Clarissa was sitting on the couch, scrolling through something on her phone. When she saw us, she got up and hugged me with one arm without taking her eyes off the screen. Aiden and Mia were running around the yard with Derek, who was loudly commenting on their every move. Volin looked at them through the glass door and didn't join them. He doesn't like noisy games at all. He prefers to sit with his album and draw. I put the cake on the kitchen table. Clarissa came over, looked at it, and said, "Oh, you baked it yourself. That's sweet." Her cake was standing next to it. Flawless, with perfect blue cream roses and an inscription in calligraphic handwriting. Of course. Mom was setting the table, and when I offered to help, she waved her hand. "Sit down. You're tired after work." There was something in her voice, not concern, but rather a statement of fact. "You work as a hostess, you're on your feet all day, poor thing. Clarissa works in an office, at a computer, in a comfortable chair." But I kept quiet, as always. Volin sat down next to me and took out an album. He always carries it with him everywhere. He draws dinosaurs, astronauts, sometimes the two of us walking hand in hand. Mom glanced at it and said, "Maybe you should put it away, dear. It's a holiday today." Volin nodded and put the album back in his backpack. Derek burst in from the yard with the kids, red from running, loud. He slapped me on the shoulder. "Hey, Astrid, how's life?" I smiled. "Fine." He wasn't expecting a detailed answer. He asked out of politeness and immediately switched to Clarissa, telling her something about some deal at work. We ate pizza. Aiden and Mia talked about soccer practice and some school exhibition their parents had taken them to. Marjorie listened, nodding, asking for details, smiling. Clarissa added to the conversation and showed photos on her phone. I sat and cut Valana's pizza into small pieces, even though he could have done it himself. I just needed something to keep my hands busy. And then it was time for presents. Mom brought 2 large packages and 1 small one. The small one was wrapped in cheap paper from the dollar store. I recognized it because I buy paper there myself, since normal paper is too expensive. Marjorie put everything on the table and started talking. About difficult times, about the economy, about the need to appreciate simple things and not chase after luxury. I listened and thought, she has a steady job, Clarissa too, and so do I. What is she talking about? But Volin sat nearby staring at the packages with wide eyes. He didn't care what was inside. What mattered to him was that he was remembered, that he was loved just as much as Aiden and Mia. Marjorie handed the large packages to the twins. Aiden tore the paper open first, a brand new iPhone, the latest model. He squealed, jumped up, and hugged his grandmother. Mia unwrapped hers, the same, only a different color. They both made a lot of noise, poking at the screens, showing each other something. Volin watched. I saw his face change from excitement to something else. Hope, perhaps. Then Mom took a small package and handed it to Volin. He took it carefully, unwrapping the paper gently, without tearing it as he usually does. Inside were 3 pairs of socks, gray, white, and black, and a cheap t-shirt with some cartoon print that Volin doesn't watch and never has. He took out the socks and looked at them, then at his grandmother, then at me. Aiden and Mia were already making noise again, poking at their phones. Derek was showing them some features, laughing. Clarissa was filming everything, smiling. And Volin quietly asked, "Mom, did I do something wrong?" I don't know what I answered. Something like, "No, dear, of course not." I hugged him and held him close. He didn't cry. He rarely cries, but I could feel his little body tense up. A 7-year-old who thinks he's to blame for getting socks instead of an $800 phone. Marjorie said something about practicality, about Volin being too young for a phone. Clarissa nodded. Derek was already offering cake. We each had a piece. No one touched my crooked cake. Clarissa's was devoured in an instant. Volin ate silently, sitting next to me. Aiden came over and showed him the phone, but Volin just nodded, showing no interest. We left early. I said that school was tomorrow and that Volin needed to go to bed early. Marjorie didn't try to persuade us to stay. We drove home in silence. Volin held a bag of socks on his lap and looked out the window. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers went numb. At home, he went to his corner, took out his album, and started drawing. I didn't ask what. I just lay down on the couch and stared at the ceiling. One thought kept running through my head. Did I do something wrong? The 7-year-old boy thought he was to blame, that he wasn't good enough. That's why his grandmother didn't love him. And I thought, maybe I did something wrong. 7 years ago, I got pregnant by a guy named Brandon. He worked as a bartender on South Street, told funny stories, and had a neat beard. We dated for 3 months. I thought it was something serious. And then I showed him the test with 2 pink stripes. He said, "I need to think about it." He thought quickly. The next day his number wasn't answering, and the bar said he had quit. I never saw him again. When I told my mom, she just said, "Now it's your problem, Astrid." She didn't offer to help. She didn't say we'd get through it together. Just, your problem. I was 19. I worked as a hostess and shared a room with 2 girls who threw parties every weekend. I didn't know what to do, but I gave birth to Volin because I couldn't do anything else. Clarissa said then that I had ruined my life. Maybe she's right. I didn't go to college. I didn't travel. I just worked, took care of Volin, worked some more. I moved to another restaurant that paid a little better. I rented this apartment with a kitchen the size of a closet, but it's ours. Marjorie never forgave me, not with words. She never says anything directly, but I feel it in every glance, every sigh when I tell her that I'm working on the weekend again or that Volin needs new sneakers. She looks at me as if I'm to blame for everything. Maybe I am, but Volin isn't. He's not to blame for anything. He's just a kid who loves dinosaurs and draws comics. He never asks for anything extra. He didn't even ask for presents on his birthday. He just wanted a cake and for everyone to be together. And Grandma gave him socks. I lay on the sofa and listen to Volin drawing in the corner, the quiet rustling of pencils. He didn't cry. He learned to hide his pain too early, and that's my fault too. It was getting dark outside. I should have gotten up, made dinner, checked his homework, but I just lay there and stared at the ceiling, feeling something inside me click quietly, like a light switch. Click, and darkness, or vice versa. It depends on how you look at it. Chapter 2. Quiet revenge smells like a burned bridge. The next morning, I woke up to the alarm at 7:30 and immediately remembered the socks. Volin was already awake, sitting in his corner and drawing something in his sketchbook. When I approached, he quickly closed the page. I didn't ask any questions. I just patted him on the head and went to make breakfast. The toaster was malfunctioning again, and I stood holding the bread over the stove, just like my grandmother used to do. Volin ate quickly, silently, grabbed his backpack and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned around. "Mom, is Grandma mad at me?" I froze with the undercooked toast in my hand. "No, dear, of course not. Why would you think that?" He shrugged. "She just didn't call yesterday." Marjorie always called the day after a birthday. She would ask if we liked the gifts, what we did in the evening. Always. I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged him. She's probably busy. Don't worry. Volin nodded, but I could see he didn't believe me. I took the bus to work because the car was using too much gas again, and payday was still a week away. The restaurant opened at 11, but I arrived early because I wanted to get everything ready for the lunch rush. Wanda was already there, checking the menus on the tables. She had been working as a waitress for 15 years, knew all the regulars by name, and always noticed when something was wrong. She looked at me and immediately said, "Let's go for a smoke." I don't smoke, but I always go out with her for a smoke break. It's the only way to talk alone in this place. We stood by the trash cans in the backyard. Wanda lit a cigarette and waited. I looked at the asphalt, at a cigarette butt near my shoe, and suddenly said, "Mom gave Volin socks for his birthday, and Clarissa's grandchildren got iPhones." Wanda took a drag, exhaled, and was silent for about 10 seconds. Then she said, "I told you about your mother. I told you 3 years ago." She was talking. After that time when Marjorie came to the restaurant, saw Wanda at our table, and kept giving her strange looks. Then she said to me, "Are you really friends with the waitresses?" Well, to each her own. Wanda heard that and said to me directly, "Your mother is a bitch, Astrid, but you don't want to hear it." I was offended. We didn't talk for a week, but Wanda was right. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked now, looking at me through the smoke. I didn't know. I just shrugged. "What can I do? She's my mother." Wanda grimaced. "That's no excuse. My mother was a bitch too, and you know what? I stopped talking to her 5 years ago, and you know what else? I'm happier." The change was long. Lunchtime is always the worst, when all the tables are full, people are waiting, getting nervous, and you're trying to seat everyone so that no one complains. I smiled, wrote down names, said, "A table will be free soon," and all the time my head was spinning. Socks, iPhones, Volin's face when he asked if he had done something wrong. I got home at 8 in the evening. Volin was sitting at our neighbor's house. She sometimes babysits him for $20, which is cheaper than after-school care. He showed me a drawing, a dinosaur holding a little dinosaur in its paws. "That's you and me," he said. I almost cried right there in the hallway. In the evening, when Volin fell asleep, I sat down on the sofa with my laptop. I opened the website of the company where I work. A year ago, my manager said that I could add close relatives to my health insurance. It's one of the benefits you get after 3 years of work. I thought then, that's good. I can help my family. My mom works in a dental clinic, but they only provide basic insurance that covers almost nothing. Clarice has insurance through her husband, but it's not the best either. I added them both. Marjorie didn't even thank me. She just said, "Okay, enter the data." I stared at the screen. On the list, Volin Miller, son. Marjorie Garland, mother. Clarissa Witherspoon, sister. The cursor flashed next to the edit button. I sat there for 10 minutes just looking. Then I clicked. I deleted Marjorie. I deleted Clarissa. I changed the emergency contacts. Instead of my mother, I wrote Wanda, her phone number. I clicked Save. The screen flashed. Changes saved. That's it. I closed the laptop and felt something strange. Not guilt, not regret, just relief. As if something heavy had been lifted from my shoulders. The week was quiet. Marjorie didn't call. Clarissa wrote once. Some photo from a walk with the kids. I liked it and didn't reply. Volin asked about his grandmother 2 more times, but then stopped. At work, Wanda looked at me strangely but didn't ask anything. Gavin, the cook, whom I hardly ever spoke to, suddenly started showing up in the dining room more often, bringing me coffee when he saw that I was tired. I didn't understand why, but I was grateful. On Friday evening, when I was about to go home, the phone rang. An unknown number. I picked up the phone and heard my mother's voice, trembling, angry, and frightened at the same time. "Astrid, I'm in the hospital. I fell and broke my leg. Come immediately." I stood in the dressing room holding the phone and couldn't say a word. "Astrid, can you hear me?" I said, "I can hear you. What happened?" She began to tell me. She fell on the stairs near the clinic. An ambulance brought her to the hospital. They took an x-ray. They're putting a cast on it. And then her voice changed. It became sharp. "And do you know what they told me? That I don't have insurance, that I have to pay for everything myself, several $1,000s, Astrid. What have you done?" I was silent. I could hear her breathing into the phone, waiting for an answer. Finally, she said, "I removed you from my insurance." Silence, then a scream. "What? Are you out of your mind? How could you? I'm your mother." I listened to her screaming and felt nothing. I just stood there and listened. Finally, I interrupted. "Mom, I have to go. Volin is waiting." And I hung up. My hands were shaking. I sat down on a bench in the locker room and closed my eyes. The phone rang again immediately. It was my mother. I hung up. Again, Clarissa. I hung up. Messages poured in one after another. I opened my phone and blocked them both. I just pressed the buttons, and that was it. Silence. At home, Volin was asleep. My neighbor said he had fallen asleep early, exhausted. I sat down on the sofa and stared out the dark window. My phone lay nearby, turned off. I knew there would be more tomorrow. I knew Clarissa wouldn't let up. I knew my mom wouldn't forgive me. But I thought about the socks, about how Volin asked if he had done something wrong, and I didn't regret it. The next day, Clarissa wrote from a work number that I hadn't had time to block. "Astrid, we need to talk. This is crazy. Mom is in the hospital. She can't afford to pay that amount. You have to get her back on insurance." I read it, didn't reply. An hour later, another one. "Call me. Immediately." I didn't call. On Monday, when I came to work, Wanda immediately pulled me out for a smoke break. "What happened? You look like you haven't slept all night." I hadn't slept. I told her about the call, about the hospital, about blocking them. Wanda listened, taking a drag on her cigarette, and then smiled. "Well done. Finally." I didn't feel like I had done well. I felt tired. In the evening, I unblocked my mother. She called immediately. I picked up the phone and heard, "Finally! Astrid, what's wrong with you? How can you treat your own mother like this?" I let her talk. She talked about ingratitude, about how much she had done for me, how she had raised me alone, how I was now repaying her. I listened and thought, when exactly had she raised me alone? My father died when I was 15, but before that, he was... And after that, my mother spent more time with Clarissa, because Clarissa was promising going to college, had plans. When my mother finally fell silent, I said calmly, "Mom, I can't keep you on my insurance anymore. I'm sorry." She screamed, "Why? What did I do to you?" I was silent. I couldn't tell her about the socks. It would have sounded petty, childish. But it wasn't just the socks. It was years of Volin not existing for her, just like Aiden and Mia. Years of sighs when I talked about him. Years of her coming to Clarissa's for the holidays and treating us like guests, not family. "You didn't do anything to me, Mom," I said finally. "I just can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." And I hung up again. Blocked her again. Clarissa wrote late that night. "Astrid, don't be a child. Mom is sick. She needs help. You're her daughter. Think about the family." I looked at that message and thought, who thought about Volin? Who thought about me when I was 19 and scared and didn't know how to survive with a child? Who thought about the family then? Derek also wrote, briefly, "You're going too far. Think about your family." I blocked him too. That evening, Volin asked, "Mom, why isn't Grandma calling?" I didn't know what to say. I said, "She's busy, dear." He looked at me with those intelligent eyes of his and nodded. He didn't believe me, but he didn't ask any more questions. And that made me feel even worse. He had learned not to ask questions because he knew the answer wouldn't be honest. I lay on the couch that evening, staring at the ceiling and thinking, am I doing the right thing? Maybe I am going too far. Maybe I should have just swallowed it, as usual, and moved on. But then I remembered Volan's face when he was unwrapping those socks, and I realized, no, I'm not going too far. I just finally stopped putting up with it. On Thursday, when I was finishing my shift, Wanda came up to me and said quietly, "Your mom is in the parking lot. She's been sitting in the car for an hour." I froze, holding the tablet with tomorrow's reservations in my hands. "What?" Wanda nodded toward the window. "I saw her arrive. She's on crutches. She's just sitting there waiting." I looked at my watch. It was 9 o'clock at night, dark, and the parking lot was almost empty. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel my pulse in my temples. Wanda put her hand on my shoulder. "Do you want me to go with you?" I shook my head. "No, I'll go alone." But I didn't want to go. I stood by the door for another 5 minutes, looking at my mother's car through the glass. Finally, I pushed the door open and went out. Marjorie was already standing by my car, leaning on crutches. Her left leg was in a cast up to the knee. Her face was tired, but her eyes were fierce. She saw me and immediately began, "Finally. I've been waiting here for an hour and a half, Astrid. An hour and a half on crutches, with a broken leg." I stopped a few steps away from her, holding the keys in my hands so tightly that they dug into my palm. "Mom, what are you doing here?" She laughed, shortly, angrily. "What am I doing? You're blocking me. You're not answering my calls. You took me off your insurance when I'm in the hospital, and you're asking me what I'm doing." I looked at her and thought, when was the last time I saw my mom like this? Angry, with red spots on her cheeks, with those tense lips? Maybe never. Marjorie had always been reserved, cold, passive-aggressive, but she never yelled so openly. "Do you want me to die without help?" she said loudly, and I noticed several people at the restaurant entrance turn around. "Do you want your mother to be left without medical care? After everything I've done for you?" I stood silently and suddenly felt not guilt, not regret, only fatigue. Endless, deep fatigue from all of this. "Mom," I said quietly, but she interrupted me. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare talk to me so calmly, as if I've done something wrong. You're the one who's being selfish. I'm your mother, Astrid. I gave birth to you, raised you, and this is how you repay me?" I looked at her and suddenly said what I had been thinking all week. "You gave my son socks, Mom, and your other grandchildren, phones worth $800 each, and you don't see anything wrong with that." Marjorie froze. Her face changed, from anger to surprise, then to irritation. "What are you talking about? What does this have to do with insurance?" I felt something inside me snap. "Everything. Volan is your grandson, just like Aiden and Mia, but you've never treated him the same way. Never." Marjorie staggered on her crutches and caught her breath. "Astrid, don't be ridiculous. I love Volan, but you understand that the situations are different. Aiden and Mia are older. They need these things for school, for communication. Volan is still little." "He's 7, Mom. Aiden and Mia are 9. 2 years difference isn't a reason to give one a phone and the other socks." She tried a different approach, her voice softening, almost pleading. "Honey, I didn't mean to hurt him. I just had a limited budget this month, you know. I couldn't buy everyone the same gifts." I shook my head. "You have a steady job, Mom. You don't have any loans. You just didn't think it was necessary to spend as much on him as on the others." She pressed her lips together. "You're too sensitive. You've always been like that. You take everything to heart." And that's when I realized she would never admit it. She would never say, "I'm sorry, I was wrong." She would never see that she had hurt my son, because for her it really was a trifle, because Volan was really less important to her. "Mom, I can't pretend this is normal anymore," I said, and went to the car. Marjorie shouted after me, "Astrid, you can't just leave. We're not done talking." I opened the door and got behind the wheel. She came up and knocked on the window with her crutch. "I'm your mother. You have no right to treat me like this." I started the engine. I looked at her one last time. She was standing in the parking lot on crutches, her face full of anger and incomprehension, and I drove away. I drove home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers hurt. My phone rang 3 times while I was driving. I didn't answer it. At home, Volin was still awake, sitting on the couch, watching cartoons on the old tablet I bought secondhand 2 years ago. He saw me and immediately asked, "Mom, have you been crying?" I hadn't been crying. My eyes were just red from exhaustion. "No, dear, I'm just tired." He nodded, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe me. The next morning at work, everyone was looking at me strangely. Finally, Wanda said, "The manager asked if everything was okay. Did anyone see the scene in the parking lot yesterday?" I felt my face burning. "Did someone complain?" Wanda shook her head. "No, he just asked. I said everything was fine. Family problems." I nodded, grateful to her for that. During lunch break, Gavin brought me coffee. He just put it on the table where I was sitting with my phone and sat down across from me. We had hardly spoken before. He worked in the kitchen, I worked in the dining room. Our paths rarely crossed. But now he sat and looked at me calmly, without curiosity, without pity. Just presence. "Thanks," I said, taking the coffee. He nodded. "Tough week?" I smiled. "You could say that." He didn't ask for details. He just sat there while I drank my coffee and then said, "My mom doesn't talk to me either. It's been 3 years." I looked at him in surprise. Gavin was usually quiet, kept to himself, and I knew almost nothing about him except that he was a good cook and had tattoos on his arms. "Why?" I asked. He shrugged. "It's a long story. The short version is that I made a choice she didn't like. She said I wasn't her son anymore." I said, "Okay." He spoke without emotion, but I could hear something beneath the surface. Pain that he had learned to hide. I knew that feeling. "Don't you regret it?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember how it was when we still talked, and I realize it's better this way. For me, anyway." He finished his coffee and went back to the kitchen without waiting for an answer. But I felt a little better, knowing that I'm not alone, that someone understands. On Friday, Clarissa wrote, "Can we meet? We need to talk." I didn't want to, but something told me I had to. I had to close this chapter once and for all. I replied, "Tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the coffee shop on Main Street." She sent a smiley face emoji. I didn't feel any relief. On Saturday, I took Volin to Wanda's. She agreed to sit with him for a couple of hours. He took his album and dinosaurs and went to her, happy. And I drove to the coffee shop, gripping the steering wheel and rehearsing what I was going to say in my head. Clarissa was already sitting at a table with a latte in her hands and her phone in front of her. She saw me, smiled, and waved. I sat down across from her and ordered a black coffee. The waitress left and Clarissa immediately began, "Listen, I understand that you're upset, but let's be adults. Mom didn't mean to offend Volin. She paused, searching for words. "She just what?" I asked. Clarissa sighed. "Well, you know, she has a different attitude toward situations. Volin is a different story than Aiden and Mia. You understand?" I looked at her and couldn't believe it. A different story. Clarissa, he's 7 years old. He's a child. Not a situation, not a story. A child. She shook her head. "You know what I mean. Mom never approved of what happened. That you got pregnant so early by someone unknown." I felt my jaw clench. Brandon's name was Brandon, and he's not unknown. He's just a traitor who ran away. Clarissa looked at me with pity. "Astrid, I'm on your side. But you understand that it was a blow to Mom. She dreamed so much that you would go to college, have a career, and I ruined everything," I finished for her. Clarissa didn't argue. She just nodded. "Well, that's how it turned out, and Mom still can't come to terms with it. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love Volin." "Then why did she give him socks, Clarissa? Why did your kids get phones but my son got socks?" Clarissa shrugged. Maybe it was the budget. Maybe she thought it would be more practical for you. I don't know. But that's no reason to make a big deal out of it, to take her off the insurance. I leaned forward. And who thought about Volin when he was being humiliated? Who thought about the 7-year-old boy asking if he had done something wrong? Clarissa was silent. Then she said quietly, "Well, you know how Mom feels about," and didn't finish. But I finished for her in my head. About mistakes. About shame. To Volin, who reminds everyone that I ruined my life at 19. I got up. Clarissa looked surprised. "Where are you going? We're not done." I grabbed my bag. "We're done, Clarissa. We've been done for a long time." She tried to stop me. "Astrid, don't be like that. Think about your family." I turned around. I am thinking about my family, about Volin. And I left without looking back. I cried on the way home, not out of grief or pain, but out of relief. Relief that I had finally said everything I thought. Relief that I had finally left. I took Volin from Wanda and brought him home. He asked, "Mom, are we not going to visit Grandma anymore?" I didn't know what to say. I looked at him, at those serious eyes, at that face trying to be grown up. "I don't know, dear. Maybe not." He nodded. "Okay." I didn't really like it there. In the evening, when Volin fell asleep, I sat on the sofa with a cup of tea and thought, what now? No mom, no sister, no family that I tried to keep together for 7 years. There's just me and Volin, and it's scary, but at the same time, it's easier. Because now I don't have to pretend. I don't have to smile when it hurts. I don't have to explain to Volin why his grandmother doesn't love him as much as the others. The phone was lying nearby, turned off. I didn't unlock them anymore. I didn't want to. The door closed and someone outside was shouting, but I couldn't hear it anymore. And that was right. The first week without them was strange. I kept waiting for a call, a message, another attempt to reach out, but the phone remained silent. Volin asked about his grandmother for the first few days and then stopped. One evening, as we sat at the table with yet another serving of macaroni and cheese, he suddenly said, "Mom, I like that we're eating at home now. You're a better cook than Grandma." That wasn't true. I'm a terrible cook. I burn rice, oversalt everything, and the pasta is either undercooked or overcooked. My mom was a much better cook, and Volin knew it. But he sat there, twirling his pasta with his fork and smiling at me, trying to cheer me up. I felt both warm and hurt. A 7-year-old child shouldn't have to support an adult, but he did it because he sensed that I was having a hard time. I reached out and stroked his head. "Thank you, dear." He nodded and continued eating, while I sat and thought, maybe it's better this way. Maybe the two of us are enough. Maybe we don't need a family that pretends to care about us. The atmosphere at work had changed too. My manager, Michael, called me into his office at the end of the second week. I walked in, my heart pounding, thinking that maybe someone had complained about the scene with my mother in the parking lot. But Michael smiled when I walked in. "Astrid, sit down. I want to talk to you." I sat on the edge of the chair, clenching my hands. He looked at me intently. "You've been working here for almost 4 years, right?" I nodded. "Yes, it will be 4 in September." He picked up a folder from the table. "You're a good employee. Responsible, punctual, the customers love you. I was thinking of you for the assistant manager position." I froze. Assistant manager meant more money, a stable schedule, no more standing all day. It was what I had dreamed of, but never thought was possible. "Really?" was all I could manage to say. Michael smiled. "Yes, think about it. If you're interested, fill out the application by the end of the week." I left the office in disbelief. Wanda was waiting at the bar, saw my face, and came over. "What happened?" I told her. She hugged me so tightly that I could hardly breathe. "Finally, I told you you could do it." I hadn't told her, but she was the one who had once hinted to Michael that I was better than many others. She always believed in me more than I believed in myself. That evening, I filled out the application. I sat at my laptop while Volan slept, and I carefully wrote down my experience, skills, and reasons why I wanted this job. I sent it off and felt something lift in my chest. Maybe things are changing for the better after all. A week later, they told me I got the job. I start next month. More money, not much, but enough to stop counting every dollar. A more stable schedule, 5 days a week, weekends off. I couldn't remember the last time I had a real weekend. Volan was happier than I was. When I told him, he jumped up. "Does that mean you'll be home more?" I nodded, and he rushed to hug me. We stood in the middle of that tiny living room, and he clung to me, and I thought, this is worth it. Gavin greeted me the next day at work. He brought coffee and sat across from me, as was becoming a habit. We started talking more often after that incident in the parking lot. He told me about his son, Ethan, 15 years old, who lives in Ohio with his mother. Gavin sees him twice a year, at Christmas and in the summer. He spoke without emotion, but I could hear the pain in his words. I knew that feeling. When you talk about something important, but try not to show how much it hurts. We started having lunch together. Not always, but often. We just sat, ate, and talked about little things. He talked about the kitchen, about difficult orders, about how someone demanded a steak that was both well done and juicy. I talked about customers who reserve a table for 6, but then 10 people show up and wonder why there's no room. We laughed, and it was easy. I didn't have to explain why I was alone with a child. I didn't have to justify my life. One day, he asked about Volan. I showed him a photo. Volan with an album, smiling at the camera. Gavin looked closely. "He looks like you. Does he like to draw too?" I nodded. He loves it. Dinosaurs, astronauts, comics. I enrolled him in an art studio at school. Free, fortunately. Gavin smiled. Ethan also drew at that age. Now he plays the guitar. He wants to be a musician. There was pride in his voice, but also sadness. He missed his son. That was obvious. A few weeks after my promotion, Gavin started bringing food. Not openly, not making a big deal out of it. Just at the end of his shift, he would show up with a container. Leftovers. They're going to throw them away anyway. At first, I believed him, but then I noticed that it wasn't leftovers. It was well-cooked pieces of steak, fresh salmon, grilled vegetables. He cooked them especially for us, for me and Volan. I didn't know how to react. Once I tried to refuse. "Gavin, this is too much. I can't keep taking it." He looked at me calmly. "Astrid, it's food. It will either go to you or to the trash. Choose." I took the container. At home, Volan ate everything in 5 minutes and asked, "Mom, did you learn how to cook like this?" I laughed. "No, dear. The chef from work cooked it." Volan nodded. "He's good. Tell him thank you." I did. Gavin just nodded, but I saw something soften in his face. The next time, he brought even more. The new job turned out to be more difficult than I thought. I had to manage schedules, resolve conflicts between waiters, and communicate with suppliers. The first few weeks, I came home exhausted, collapsed on the couch, and couldn't move. But Volan was happy. I picked him up from school myself. We ate dinner together. I could help with his homework. It was worth it. Wanda became a close friend, not just a colleague. We started meeting after work sometimes, drinking coffee and talking. She told me her story, how she got married at 18, had 3 children before she was 25, and then realized that her husband was drinking all her money and beating her when she objected. How she left, taking the children with her, and how her own mother said, "You destroyed the family. Don't expect any help from me." How she survived on her own, working 2 jobs, and how her children grew up and now help her. I listened and thought, we're all a little broken. We all carry our stories, our scars, but some of us have learned to live with it. One day, a month after the breakup, Clarissa texted from an unknown number. "Mom's in the hospital. She's not doing well. Think of her." I read it and put my phone down. I didn't reply. The next day, Wanda said she saw Marjorie at the grocery store. She looked fine, was walking without crutches, even laughing with someone at the checkout. I nodded, not surprised. It was manipulation, another attempt to reach out. I blocked that number too. Clarissa didn't write anymore. Life became easier. Not perfect. We still lived in a tiny apartment. Volin still wore secondhand clothes. I still counted my money until payday. But I breathed more freely. I didn't have to explain why I didn't come to family dinners. I didn't have to listen to my mother's sighs when I talked about Volin. I didn't have to pretend that everything was fine. Volin changed too. He became more relaxed and laughed more often. At the art studio, the teacher said that he was talented and worth developing. I bought him a set of professional pencils. Not expensive, but better than the ones he had. He was glowing with happiness. One evening, when we were sitting at home, Volin was drawing and I was checking the schedule for the next week. He suddenly asked, "Mom, are we happy?" I looked up, surprised. "What?" He didn't take his eyes off the album. "Well, at school, everyone talks about their families. Jake has a grandmother and grandfather, aunts, uncles. We only have each other. But I think we're happy. Am I right?" I came over, sat down next to him, and hugged him. "Yes, dear, we're happy, in our own way." He nodded, satisfied with the answer, and continued drawing. And I sat there, hugging him, and thought, maybe he's right. Maybe this is happiness. Not perfect, not like on Instagram, not like everyone else's, but ours. Real. It was getting dark outside. Philadelphia was bustling with its usual noise. Cars, voices, distant music from some party. I looked at my son as he concentrated on drawing another dinosaur, and I felt that we would manage. Without my mother, without Clarissa, without the family I had tried to keep together, we would manage together. Because we were a real family, one that was held together not by duty, but by love. Late in the evening, Gavin wrote, "I'll cook something special tomorrow. Valana will like it." I smiled and replied, "Thank you. You are too kind to us." He simply replied, "Not too kind, just right." I didn't know what that meant, but it made me happy. It had been a long time since someone's words had made me so happy. I fell asleep peacefully that night, for the first time in many weeks, without anxiety, without guilt, without the feeling that I was doing something wrong, just peacefully. And it was the best feeling in the world. November came with rain and cold winds that blew the yellow leaves off the trees. 6 months without family, 6 months of silence, which was scary at first, but then became familiar, almost comfortable. I was making progress at work. Michael trusted me more and more. Now I made the schedules myself, communicated with suppliers, resolved conflicts between waiters. It turned out I was good at it. People listened when I spoke. It was a strange, unfamiliar feeling. To be heard, to be someone whose opinion was valued. Once, a young waitress, Ashley, came to me in tears. A customer had yelled at her because the soup wasn't hot enough. I went out into the dining room, calmly talked to the man, explained that we would reheat the soup, but that yelling at the staff was unacceptable. He muttered something, but calmed down. Ashley then hugged me. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it myself." And I thought, I could have. When did that happen? When did I learn to stand up for myself and others? Volin brought home drawings from art class almost every day. The dinosaurs became more complex with details I hadn't noticed before. Scales, shadows, expressions in their eyes. The spaceships were covered with technical elements that he drew with amazing accuracy. The teacher, Mrs. Chen, stopped me once after class. "Volin has real talent. He sees the world in a special way." I watched my son carefully put the album in his backpack and felt a wave of pride wash over me. Sometimes he drew the two of us, always smiling, always together, often holding hands. I hung one such drawing on the refrigerator, attaching it with a magnet in the shape of Philadelphia. Volin saw it in the evening and beamed. "Do you like it?" I crouched down to be at eye level with him and hugged him. "I love it. It's the best drawing in the world." He leaned against me and we stood there for a minute, in the middle of the kitchen, in this tiny apartment that suddenly seemed cozy. Gavin and I started seeing each other more often after work. Not dates. We were both afraid of that word, afraid of rushing things. Just conversations over coffee, sometimes walks along the Schuylkill River when the weather permitted. He talked about Ethan, about how much he missed him, but couldn't change the situation. His ex-wife had moved to Ohio with her new husband, taking their son with her, and the court had set minimal visitation rights. I tried to fight it, he said, looking at the water. I hired a lawyer, spent all my savings, but the court decided that a stable family was more important, and I'm just a single chef with tattoos. There was no anger in his voice, only a dull weariness from the injustice. I told him about Volin, about my mother, about how scary and at the same time easy it had become without a family. Gavin listened without interrupting, without trying to give advice. He just listened, and that was exactly what I needed. Not a solution, not a judgment, just the presence of someone who understood. One day, when it was really getting cold and I took Volin's winter jacket out of the closet, which had become too small for him in a year, Gavin asked, "My friends are having a picnic on Saturday at Farmount Park. There will be lots of kids, food, someone promised to bring their dog. Would you like to join us?" I hesitated. I wasn't used to such invitations, to strangers, to the need to be social. But Volin had been constantly asking for a dog lately, studying breeds in library books, drawing them in his album. And I couldn't afford a dog, or even think about one. Maybe I could at least play with someone else's. "Okay," I said. "We'll come." Saturday morning was unexpectedly sunny, despite it being November. It was one of those rare days when autumn feels almost like spring. We arrived at the park around 11, where a large group had already gathered. Families with children, tables with food. Someone had brought a portable grill and was cooking burgers. Music played quietly from someone's speaker. Some kind of indie rock, relaxed and pleasant. Gavin met us at the entrance and introduced us to his friends. Marcus, a tall man with a gray beard, and Jessica, his wife, who immediately smiled at me so warmly as if we had known each other for years. And they brought a golden retriever named Baxter. Huge, friendly, with his tongue hanging out. Volin fell in love with the dog at first sight. His eyes widened. He crouched down. "Can I pet him?" Jessica laughed. "Of course, he loves children." For the next hour, I hardly saw my son. He and Baxter ran around the park. Volin threw sticks. The dog fetched them. They fell on the grass in a pile of leaves, laughing and barking. Other children joined in, and soon a whole pack was running between the trees. Volin laughed like I hadn't heard him laugh in a long time. Freely, loudly, without a trace of the tension that had always been with him in recent years. I sat on a blanket spread out near one of the trees, drinking cold lemonade that someone had brought in a large glass jar with ice and mint. Marcus was telling a story about how he and Gavin met 10 years ago at a cooking class, and how Gavin almost burned down the kitchen by forgetting about the pan. Gavin laughed, denying the details. I looked at them, at their ease in communicating, at how they joked without malice, and felt something inside me relax. Gavin sat down next to me and handed me a plate with a burger and salad. "Eat up, you're too skinny." I took it without arguing. The meat was juicy, cooked to perfection. "Did you make this?" I asked. He nodded. "Marcus cooks, but according to my recipe." We ate in silence, watching the children, the dog, everything. A simple autumn day in the park, nothing special, but somehow perfect. Then Gavin said quietly, without looking at me, "It suits you to smile." I turned around, surprised. He was looking at the children, but I saw a slight smile at the corner of his lips. "I don't smile that often?" I asked. He turned to me. "More often than 6 months ago, but still not enough." I didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. Not in that way, without hinting, without expectation. Just a statement of fact given freely. I smiled wider, a little shyly. He nodded, satisfied, and we continued to sit in silence. It was good. It was easy. It was what I had been missing so much. Jessica sat down next to me a little later when the men went to do something with the grill. "Gavin has told me a lot about you," she said. I was scared. "What exactly?" She smiled. "Good things. That you're strong, that you're a good mother, that you deserve happiness." I felt my cheeks burning. "He exaggerates." Jessica shook her head. "Gavin isn't one to exaggerate. If he said something, he means it." She paused, then added more quietly, "He deserves happiness, too. He's had a rough few years. I'm glad you came along." That evening, as we drove home, Volin fell asleep in the car, hugging the backpack Jessica had packed with a piece of cake and cookies. I looked at him in the rearview mirror, his face relaxed, smiling slightly in his sleep. I wondered, when was the last time I saw him this peaceful? Maybe never. The following week at work, I finally got used to my new role. Wanda laughed when I spoke sternly to the new waitress who was always late. "Look how bossy you've become. Soon you'll retire, Michael, and run the restaurant yourself." But she said it with pride, and I knew she was happy for me. I learned to say no, to set boundaries, to not be afraid of conflict. It was difficult. For years, I had been used to giving in, smoothing things over, being accommodating. But now I saw that it was possible to be different. It was possible to be honest and firm, and people would not turn away. On the contrary, they would respect you. On Wednesday evening, when I returned home with Volan after his art studio, my mother was standing at the door of our apartment. I saw her on the stairs, aged, tired, wearing an old dark blue coat that I remembered from 10 years ago. She was leaning on the railing and looking at me with that special look, half guilty, half demanding. Volan squeezed my hand. "Mom." I nodded, trying to stay calm. "It's okay. Go into the apartment." He didn't argue, quickly opened the door with his key and disappeared inside, looking back at me one last time with a worried expression on his face. I approached my mother, stopping a few steps away. She looked older than she had 6 months ago. Her wrinkles had deepened, especially around her mouth. Her eyes were tired, with red veins. Her hair, which she always dyed chestnut brown, now had gray roots. But her expression was the same, stubborn, unyielding, saying, "I'm right, and the whole world around me is wrong." "Astrid," she said, her voice hoarse, as if she hadn't spoken in a long time. I remained silent, waiting with my arms crossed over my chest. "We need to talk." I still said nothing. I didn't invite her in, didn't offer her a seat. I just stood there and watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Marjorie sighed, and in that sigh there was so much familiar irritation, as if to say, "Here I am again, complicating everything." "All right, here and here. Listen, I understand that there's been a misunderstanding between us. But family is family, Astrid. You shouldn't complicate things like this over such trifles." Misunderstandings. Trifles. That's what she called them. I felt my jaws clench, but I forced myself to remain silent. I wanted to hear what she would say next, how many more excuses she would come up with. "Clarissa is very upset," Marjorie continued, and now there was a pleading note in her voice. "The children keep asking about you and Volin. Aiden even drew a birthday card for Volin, but we didn't know where to send it. It's not right to break up a family because of, well, you know." I finally spoke up. "Mom, why are you here? Really?" She hesitated, looked away at the peeling paint on the wall of the stairwell. Then she looked at me again. "I wanted to." "Well, you know that Clarissa has a different insurance company because of Derek, you understand? They have different conditions, they can't add relatives, only immediate family, and I need a doctor again. Tests. My thyroid gland, they say. I need to have tests done, maybe a biopsy. It's expensive, Astrid. Very expensive." And then I understood everything with absolute clarity. She didn't come because she missed me. Not because she wanted to make up, ask for forgiveness, admit her mistake. She came because she needed help again, because Clarissa can't give her what I can, and she thought that 6 months of silence would be enough for me to forget, forgive, and return to my old role. The convenient, obedient Astrid who always helps, always gives in, always swallows insults. No, I said quietly but firmly. Marjorie raised her eyebrows as if she hadn't heard. What? No, Mom, I'm not putting you back on the insurance. She straightened up and her face began to redden. Astrid, be reasonable. I'm your mother. You can't just... It's your duty to help your parents. I can, I interrupted, my voice calmer than I felt inside. And I will. You're not getting anything from me. No money, no insurance, no time. Marjorie took a step forward, and now she was almost shouting, How dare you! After everything I've done for you, I gave birth to you, raised you, fed you, clothed you. I gave you my whole life. I didn't back down, looking her straight in the eye. What exactly did you do, Mom? Remind me. Because all I remember is you saying, now it's your problem, when I was 19 and scared. How you ignored Volin for 7 years. How you never came to his school events but never missed Aiden and Mia's events. How you gave him socks and the other grandchildren $800 phones each. What exactly did you do for me, besides giving birth to me? Because that was your choice, Mom, not mine. She was choking with anger, her face now crimson. I raised you, that's not nothing. I could have given you away, I could have done a lot of things, but I kept you. It was your duty, Mom, I said, and every word was difficult, but I continued. You gave birth to me. That's not a feat. It's what parents do. And I don't owe you anything for fulfilling your minimal parental responsibilities. Marjorie froze for a moment, then spoke more quietly, more cunningly, and I recognized this tactic. She always did this when shouting didn't work. Volin is my grandson, too. You have no right to take him away from me. He needs to know his family. I laughed, shortly, without any joy. You took him away yourself, Mom, over the years, with every sigh, every snub, every difference between him and Aiden and Mia. I just stopped pretending it wasn't there. I stopped defending you to him. She stood there, gasping for air, searching for words, but finding none. I saw the emotions change in her eyes, anger, incomprehension, then something like self-pity. Then she turned abruptly and went down the stairs, holding onto the railing, shouting over her shoulder, her voice echoing throughout the stairwell. You'll regret this, Astrid. You'll be all alone, completely, and don't come to me when you need help. I watched her descend, her figure disappearing around the bend in the stairs, and felt nothing. No regret, no guilt, not even relief, just emptiness. A calm, clear emptiness where there had once been constant anxiety. I closed the front door, went up to my apartment, and unlocked the door. Volin was standing in the living room, his eyes wide and frightened. Was that Grandma? I nodded, taking off my coat. Yes, dear. He paused, then asked quietly, Did she want to apologize? I walked over, crouched down in front of him, and put my hands on his shoulders. No, Volin. She didn't apologize. He nodded, and in his eyes there was a kind of adult wisdom that shouldn't be in a 7-year-old boy. Okay, I didn't want to talk to her anyway. She's not very nice, is she? I hugged him and held him close. That's right, dear. She's not very nice. He hugged me back, and we stood there in the middle of the living room until I felt the tension finally leave my body. The next few months flew by surprisingly quickly. Work, home, Volin, sometimes Gavin. We started dating officially sometime in December. He asked me to the movies, then to dinner at a small Italian restaurant that made the best pasta in town. We moved slowly, carefully. 2 people with scars, afraid to take a wrong step and ruin the good thing that was developing between us. But it was nice. He didn't pressure me, didn't demand promises or commitments. He was just there. He brought coffee to work, sometimes picked Volin and me up after school. We went to the Natural History Museum together, where Volin spent hours looking at dinosaur skeletons. Volin liked Gavin. They could talk for hours about dinosaurs, spaceships, the structure of the universe. Gavin talked to him seriously, like an adult, without babbling or pretending to be interested. Volin sensed this and was drawn to him. I started looking for a new apartment sometime in late December. Not much bigger, not luxurious, just so that Volin would have a real room, not a corner behind a closet, so that he could invite friends over without being embarrassed by the cramped space. I found one through Wanda's friends. 2 bedrooms, a normal living room, a kitchen with enough space to move around. It was a little more expensive, but with my new salary, I could afford it. We moved in January when Philadelphia was covered in snow. Volin chose his room, the smaller one, but with a window overlooking the park. He hung his drawings on the walls and arranged his dinosaur collection on a new shelf we bought at IKEA. He was happy, truly, unquestionably happy, and so was I. On one of the first Saturdays in February, when the snow had melted a little and patches of bare ground had appeared, we went to the park. I bought Volin a bike online, an old one, second-hand but in working order, with a blue frame and a bell on the handlebars. He had been dreaming of learning to ride since last summer. We found an empty alley in the park, away from people, where the asphalt was smooth. I held the saddle, and Volin pedaled, tense, his tongue sticking out from concentration. "Don't let go, Mom," he shouted. "I won't," I promised, even though I knew I would have to let go. I ran alongside, holding the bike, until I felt he was riding steadily. Then I let go. Volin rode 5 meters on his own. Then the bike wobbled and he fell onto the grass on the side. I ran up, my heart pounding, but he was already getting up, laughing, shaking wet leaves off his jeans. Again! I almost did it! We spent 2 hours there. The shuttlecock fell. He got up, laughed, and rode again and again, each time a little further, a little more confidently. I stood there watching him and felt my heart fill with something warm, elusive, but very real. That's it, I thought. Happiness. Not perfect, not from Instagram, not like other families with complete sets of grandmothers, grandfathers, aunts, and uncles, but ours. Real. My son laughs, learns, isn't afraid to fall because he knows I'll pick him up. He'll never ask again if he's done something wrong, because now he knows for sure. He's perfect just the way he is, and that's enough for him. The sun began to set, painting the sky pink, orange, and purple. Volin finally rode up to me on his own, without falling, stopped, pressed his foot to the asphalt, and smiled broadly, showing the gap where his baby tooth had recently fallen out. "Mom, I did it. Did you see? I rode the whole way." I hugged him and kissed him on the top of his head, which smelled of baby shampoo and fresh air. "You're a good boy, dear. I'm very proud of you." We stood there, in the middle of the park, among the fallen leaves and remnants of snow, and I felt that everything would be fine. Not perfect, but good, because we are together, because we are living, not just surviving, because I have finally learned to breathe freely, without the constant feeling of guilt and inadequacy. I looked at my son as he got back on his bike, ready to ride again, and I thought, this is happiness. Not what they show in movies, not a fairy tale ending with princes and palaces. Just an ordinary day in the park with a laughing child. Just the feeling that you are finally where you belong, that you are finally living the way you want to, not the way others expect you to. And that was more than enough.